Father Donald, please. I beg you, don't do this to me. Father, please! She screamed out. I thought I was safe. I thought avoiding him, ignoring his calls and staying away would be enough. But the moment I was sent to clean Father Donald's room, I knew something was wrong. I should have said no. I should have run. But I didn't. And when the door locked behind me, when he came closer, when he took what he wanted, my world shattered. Now I can't sleep. I can't eat. And no matter how much I pretend, the truth won't go away. Because 2 pink lines just confirmed my worst fear. I'm pregnant, and no one will believe me. The morning light seeped through the curtains, casting a golden hue across the small room I shared with my younger sister, who was still fast asleep. My heart pounded so hard I feared it might wake her. Today was the day. I couldn't keep this secret any longer. Sliding out of bed, I wrapped my arms around myself, as if that could shield me from the storm I was about to walk into. I could already hear my mother in the sitting room, whispering prayers, her voice steady and strong. She always woke up before sunrise, kneeling before her wooden rosary stand, beads slipping between her fingers as she called upon the Virgin Mary. I hesitated at the doorway watching her. She looked so at peace, so certain in her faith. How would she react when she learned her daughter had been tainted? When she found out the man she revered, the one she called a man of God, was not what he seemed? I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped forward. Mum. My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. She didn't stop praying. I cleared my throat, forcing more strength into my words. Mum, I need to talk to you. She finally lifted her head, pressing the last bead between her fingers before making the sign of the cross. What is it, Judith? My knees felt weak, and for a second I considered dropping down beside her, pretending I had come to pray instead. Maybe that would buy me more time. Maybe I could convince myself to just stay silent. But my hands found my stomach, and the slight curve there, though barely noticeable, was enough to remind me that time had already run out. I exhaled shakily. Mum, I'm pregnant. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with something heavy and suffocating. My mother's face was unreadable at first, her dark eyes locked onto mine as if she hadn't quite heard me right. Then, a flicker of shock. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She blinked once, twice, as if waiting for me to say something else, to take it back. I didn't. Her hands clenched around the rosary. You're what? My legs trembled, but I forced myself to stay standing. I'm pregnant. Silence. A silence so loud it roared in my ears, drowning out even the sound of my own breathing. Then, in a voice so sharp it cut straight through me, she asked, Who is responsible for this? I opened my mouth, but the words got caught in my throat. I had known this moment would come, but standing here now with my mother's piercing gaze stripping me bare, I felt paralyzed. The name sat on my tongue, burning, waiting to be spoken, but how could I say it? How could I make her see the truth when I knew she wouldn't want to hear it? My mother's nostrils flared. I said, Who is responsible? Her voice rose, demanding, filled with anger and fear. I forced the words out before I lost my nerve. Father Donald. The world stopped. For a second, I saw something flicker across her face, disbelief, confusion. Then rage. The slap came so fast I barely saw her hand move. A sharp sting exploded across my cheek, and the force of it sent me stumbling back. My head snapped to the side, my vision blurred with sudden tears. I tasted blood. Don't you ever say that again, she spat, her voice shaking. Are you out of your mind? Do you even hear yourself? I clutched my face, my skin burning where her palm had struck. Mum, I'm telling you the truth. The truth, she cut me off, eyes blazing with fury. You think I will stand here and listen to this nonsense? You think I will let you slander a man of God with your lies? I shook my head desperately. I'm not lying. He always found ways to keep me behind after mass rehearsals. Stop it. Her voice rang through the house, loud enough to wake my sister. From the corner of my eye, I saw my little sister peeking from the hallway, her tiny face contorted with fear. My mother pointed a trembling finger at me. "I don't know what evil spirit has possessed you, but I will not allow it to destroy this family. Do you hear me?" Tears streamed down my face. "Mum, please listen to me." "Enough!" She turned away as if the very sight of me disgusted her. "Before I return from work today, you will sit here and think about the lies you are telling. And if you ever say this again, Judith, you will no longer have a place in this house." My chest tightened. "Mum?" She didn't look at me. She walked past me, entered the bathroom and slammed the door. I stood there, trembling, tears pouring down my face, my cheek still throbbing from her slap. I had always thought that if something bad ever happened to me, my mother would be the first person to protect me, that she would hold me, fight for me, defend me. But she wasn't my shield. She was the blade. I sat outside the parish office for what felt like an eternity, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my nails dug into my palms. My whole body was trembling, whether from fear or exhaustion, I didn't know. Maybe both. I had spent the entire walk here convincing myself that this was the right thing to do, that I had no choice but to seek help. But now, sitting on this cold wooden bench, I wasn't so sure anymore. Would he even believe me? The parish priest, Father Matthew, was known for his strictness. He was a man of deep faith, unwavering discipline, and absolute devotion to the church. People respected him, even feared him. But most importantly, he was a no-nonsense man. If anyone would get to the truth, it was him. And yet, what if he chose the wrong truth? What if he, like my mother, looked me in the eyes and saw only a liar? I exhaled shakily, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't have any more time to waste. I needed to do this. Summoning every last bit of courage I had left, I stood up and knocked on the heavy wooden door. "Come in." His voice was deep, steady, commanding. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The room smelled of old books and burning incense. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass window behind him, casting colourful patterns on the wall. Father Matthew sat behind his desk, writing in a large leather-bound journal. He didn't look up immediately. "Yes?" he asked, flipping a page. "What brings you here, Judith?" I opened my mouth, but my throat felt dry, the words stuck somewhere deep inside me. He finally glanced up and his sharp, piercing gaze landed on my face. "Well?" My hands tightened into fists. "Say it, Judith. Say it before you lose your nerve." "Father, I need to talk to you. It's serious." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Go on." I hesitated, my heart hammering. "It's about Father Donald." His expression didn't change, but I noticed the subtle way he straightened in his chair, his grip on the pen tightening. "What about him?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I'm pregnant." Silence. The word hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. He blinked once. "And?" I swallowed hard. "It's his." The pen slipped from his fingers, rolling across the desk. The shock on his face was immediate, but it lasted only a second before his expression hardened into something unreadable. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was something dangerous beneath it. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Father Donald is the father of my child." His jaw tightened. "You do understand the weight of what you're saying, don't you?" "Yes, Father." He stood up slowly, rounding the desk until he was directly in front of me. He wasn't a particularly tall man, but at that moment, he felt like a giant towering over me. "If this is true," he said, his voice grave, "then we must get to the root of it." Hope flickered in my chest. Finally, someone who would listen, someone who would fight for me. But then, his next words crushed it. "But if you are lying," he continued, his gaze cold and sharp, "if this is some scheme to ruin him, you will destroy his ordination, his life, his calling." A lump rose in my throat. "I'm not lying, Father." His eyes searched mine as if trying to pull the truth from the very depths of my soul. You must be absolutely certain. If I investigate this, and it turns out to be false, tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. He took my pride away, Father. I swear on my life, on my unborn child's life, I would never lie about this. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Tell me everything, I told him. Every single detail. I told him about how Father Donald had always found ways to keep me behind after altar server rehearsals, how he'd sent the others away and asked me to clean his room, how he always found excuses to have me alone. I told him about the night he offered me and my friend Favor drinks, how we unknowingly switched them, how she had fallen unconscious while I had been sent on an errand, how, when I returned, I found her completely passed out. I told him about the night he finally took what he had been waiting for, how he had forced himself on me, how I had tried to fight, to scream, but the walls of the parish house had swallowed my voice. By the time I finished, my whole body was shaking. I could barely breathe, barely move. Father Matthew sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His expression was troubled, but still there was something in his eyes. Doubt. You're saying all this happened and you told no one? I bit my lip, nodding. I was scared. Who would have believed me? He sighed. And your mother? What did she say? I let out a bitter laugh, though there was nothing humorous about it. She called me a liar. She said I was possessed, that I was trying to ruin a man of God. Father Matthew closed his eyes briefly, then let out another deep breath. This is a very serious accusation, Judith. I leaned forward, my voice desperate. It's not an accusation, Father. It's the truth. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked to the window, looking out as if searching for answers in the sky. Finally, he turned back to me. I will investigate this. But understand, this is not something that can be handled lightly. If the diocese gets involved, it will affect everyone. The church, your family, the entire community. Do you understand? I nodded. I need to know, he continued. Do you have any evidence? Anything that can support your claims? I hesitated. Favor, the girl who was with me that night. She was the one who drank the drugged drink. She might remember something. He nodded. I will speak with her. But Judith, I looked up. Be prepared. For what? I whispered. For the worst. I already was. Favor was the only person I could turn to now. If anyone could help me, it was her. She had been there. She had drunk that poisoned drink. She had passed out right in front of me. She knew what had happened, even if she didn't remember every detail. And most importantly, she was my friend. So why was I so afraid as I stood outside her house, my fists clenched tightly by my sides? I took a shaky breath and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and there she was. Favor. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf, and she wore a loose t-shirt that hung over one shoulder. She looked tired, like she had just woken up. The moment she saw me, her brows furrowed. Judith? I tried to smile, but my lips trembled too much. Hey, she hesitated. What are you doing here? I swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. Favor sighed, glancing over her shoulder before stepping outside, closing the door behind her. Is this about... Yes, I said quickly. It's about Father Donald, about what he did to me, to us. She exhaled, rubbing her arms like she was suddenly cold. Judith, I need you, Favor. I interrupted, my voice trembling. I need you to tell the truth. Her whole body stiffened. The truth? You were there! My voice rose in desperation. That night in the parish house, he gave us drinks. You drank the one that was meant for me, and you passed out. He drugged you, Favor. He planned to do it to me. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting away. Please, I begged, stepping closer, just tell them what happened. Just tell them that you drank it and blacked out, that you woke up confused, that I can't. The words hit me like a slap. I froze. What? She shook her head. I can't, Judith. I won't. I blinked at her, my stomach twisting. Why? She bit her lip. Because you won't win this. No one will believe you. My heart dropped. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign that she was joking, that she was scared but still willing to do the right thing. But there was nothing, only cold, brutal honesty. I don't understand, I whispered. You saw what he did. You felt it. I don't remember anything, she shot back. I passed out, remember? I don't even know if it was really him who did anything. For all we know, No, I cut in sharply. Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't know what happened. You woke up dazed. You kept saying you felt weird. And what does that prove, Judith? She snapped, crossing her arms. That I had a headache? That I was dizzy? What if I was just tired? I felt sick. This was Favor, the girl I had trusted, laughed with, shared secrets with. And here she was, tearing away the last bit of hope I had left. Favor, I whispered, my throat aching. Please. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. Look, Judith, I'm sorry, okay? But I can't help you. Even if I stand by you, it won't change anything. Father Donald is... I don't care who he is, I snapped. She flinched. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Favor, I'm pregnant. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Shock, maybe even guilt. But it disappeared just as quickly. Then, get rid of it, I gasped. My whole body went cold. What? She sighed, looking away. Just abort it and move on. I took a step back as if she had physically struck me. You can't be serious. I am serious, Judith. It's the only way. If you keep this baby, you'll ruin your life. I shook my head in disbelief. Are you hearing yourself right now? I'm trying to help you, she insisted. No, I whispered. You're trying to make this easier for you. Her face hardened. Judith, I'm telling you the truth. No one will believe you. No one will fight for you. Not your mother, not your father, not even the parish priest, and definitely not me. I felt like I was going to be sick. You're my friend, I whispered. She let out a bitter laugh. And you're asking me to destroy my life for you. Do you think they'll leave me alone if I speak up? Do you think Father Donald will just sit back and accept it? Do you know how powerful he is? How many people love him? If I stand with you, they'll come for me too. My family, my reputation, everything. You're afraid, I realized. Her jaw tightened. That's what this is, I said. You're scared. I'm smart, she shot back, and if you were smart, you'd drop this before it ruins you. I wiped at my face, not even realizing I was crying. So you're really going to pretend like none of this happened? She lifted her chin. I was never there. Those 4 words shattered me. I sucked in a shaky breath, my chest tightening. You were the only person who could help me. And I won't, she said flatly. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, to make her see the weight of what she was doing, but I knew deep down that nothing I said would change her mind. I was truly alone. I turned away, forcing my legs to move even though my whole body felt heavy. Judith, she called softly. I paused but didn't turn around. I am sorry, she murmured. I squeezed my eyes shut. No, she wasn't. Because if she truly was sorry, she wouldn't be standing on the sidelines while I drowned. She wouldn't be choosing her own comfort over my truth. I walked away without another word, my heart breaking with every step. I heard the car pull up outside and my heart nearly stopped. My father was home. I gripped the edge of the dining table, my knuckles turning white. The air in the house felt heavier than ever, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. I wasn't ready for this. But it didn't matter. The door swung open, and my father stepped inside, his presence filling the room instantly. He looked different. His face was glowing with some kind of spiritual fire. His eyes bright, his posture upright with pride. He carried his small leather Bible in one hand, his rosary beads wrapped tightly around the other. He had been away for days on a retreat, a special program with other devout men, fasting, praying, receiving divine revelations. And now he was back to hear what his daughter had done. "Welcome, my husband," she said, taking his bag from him. "How was the retreat?" "It was powerful," he said, his voice thick with conviction. "God moved in ways you cannot imagine. The sick were healed, the blind saw, demons fled at the mention of Jesus' name." My mother nodded enthusiastically, already leading him to the couch. "You must be tired. Sit, let me bring you water." He sighed as he sat down, stretching his legs, rubbing his forehead. "Ah, you should have seen it. And Father Donald, oh, that man!" He clapped his hands together, shaking his head in awe. "He is truly a vessel of God. The way he prayed, the way he ministered, he is already a priest in spirit. The anointing on his life is undeniable." My stomach twisted. Mother exchanged a quick glance with me before sitting beside him. She took a deep breath. "My husband, there is something we must discuss." He frowned, glancing between us. "What is it?" She hesitated. Then, with no warning, she said it. "Judith is pregnant." The words landed like a slap. The room seemed to go still. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. His brows furrowed, as if he hadn't heard properly. "What?" "She is pregnant," my mother repeated. He turned to me, his face unreadable. "Is this true?" I could barely move. My hands trembled as I forced myself to nod. For a moment, he just stared. Then, very quietly, he said, "Who?" My throat felt like it was closing, but I had to say it. "Father Donald." The second his name left my lips, my father jerked back like I had struck him. The change in his face was immediate. His eyes darkened, his lips parted in shock. Then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into rage. "Shut your mouth!" he roared. I flinched. "You are possessed!" His voice thundered through the room, rattling the very air. "You want to destroy a man of God? You, my own daughter?" Tears welled in my eyes. "Father, please believe me." "Believe you?" He shot to his feet, shaking with fury. "I just spent 4 days praying beside this man. I watched him heal the sick with his own hands. I saw him weep for the lost, speak in tongues, minister to the brokenhearted. And you want me to believe that he is the one who—" "Yes," I sobbed. "Yes, Father, it was him. Please, I swear." "Enough!" His voice cracked through the air like a whip. I choked on my breath, stumbling backward. My mother sat still, her hands folded in her lap, staring at me with disappointment. "Judith!" my father seethed, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Do you know what you are saying? Do you even understand the gravity of this accusation?" Tears streamed down my face. "I understand, Father, but I am telling the truth." He shook his head in disgust. "The devil has taken hold of you." I cried harder. "No, he drugged Favor." "Where is the proof?" he barked. I froze. "Where is the evidence?" he shouted, stepping closer. "Did you see him do it with your own eyes? Did anyone witness it? Can you prove it beyond your words?" I opened my mouth, but no words came, because I couldn't. Favor had abandoned me. No one else had been there. It was just me, my word against his. And to my father, that wasn't enough. He let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can ruin a man's life because of a fantasy in your head? Father, please." "You disgust me," I gasped. The room tilted. I couldn't breathe. My own father. The man who had raised me, who had prayed over me as a child, who had taught me right from wrong. He looked at me now like I was filth. "You are an agent of darkness," he spat. "Sent to bring down a great man of God. You should fall on your knees right now and beg for forgiveness before God strikes you down for this abomination." I was shaking so hard, my legs almost gave out. "You think you can destroy the work of God? You think the church will let you?" He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You will be the one destroyed, Judith, not him. You." I clutched my stomach, feeling the weight of his words sink into my bones. "But I am your daughter," I whispered. His eyes flashed with something, pain, regret, but it was gone in an instant. "You were," he said coldly, "but not anymore. I gasped, my vision blurring. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. From today, I have no daughter. I let out a broken sob. My mother sat silently beside him, not speaking, not interfering. It was done. I was alone. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and something else, something cold and sterile, like a place where truth couldn't be ignored. I sat on the examination table, my legs dangling over the edge, my hands gripping the thin paper sheet beneath me. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, held the test results in her hands. She didn't even have to say it. I already knew. Still, when she looked up and said, "You're pregnant?" it felt like the world had cracked open beneath me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My mother stood beside me, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She showed no emotion, no surprise, no sadness, no concern, just silent judgment. The doctor asked if I was okay, if I needed anything. I wanted to laugh, I wanted to scream, I wanted to tell her that what I needed was for someone to believe me. But instead, I just nodded. We left the hospital without a word. The ride home was suffocating. My mother drove in silence, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I kept my gaze on the window, watching the world blur past, people moving about their day as if my life hadn't just been torn apart. As soon as we got home, my father was waiting. He didn't even ask what the doctor said. He already knew. My mother must have told him before we even left the hospital. He stood with his arms behind his back, his expression unreadable. But when he finally spoke, his words cut deeper than I ever thought possible. "You'll leave for the village first thing tomorrow morning." I flinched. "The village?" My voice cracked. "Your grandmother will take care of you until the child is born," my mother added, her voice emotionless. I looked between them, my heart hammering in my chest. "You're sending me away?" My father nodded. "We will not allow you to destroy this family's name over your foolishness." Foolishness. I felt something inside me snap. I had begged them to believe me, I had told them the truth. And now, instead of standing by me, instead of fighting for me, they were sending me away, hiding me like a stain they couldn't wash off. "What about Father Donald?" I whispered. My father's face hardened. "There is no Father Donald in this conversation," he said. I stared at him in disbelief. "He did this to me." My voice rose, shaking with anger. "And you're just going to let him walk free, pretend like it never happened?" My mother sighed as if I were the problem. "Judith, enough." "Enough?" I laughed bitterly. "You're ashamed of me, but you're still serving him food every morning, aren't you?" She froze. I turned to her fully now, the rage bubbling inside me, no longer contained. "You still wake up before sunrise, pack his meals and take them to the parish house, don't you?" She didn't answer, because we all knew the truth. Every morning my mother would wake before dawn, prepare steaming hot food, and take it to the very man who had stolen everything from me. She still served him, still revered him. She believed him, not me. My hands clenched into fists. "How do you sleep at night?" She shot me a sharp look. "Mind your tongue, Judith." I laughed again, hollow and humorless. "No, tell me. How do you kneel down in prayer every night and talk to God when you're feeding the man who raped your daughter?" Her hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. Slap. The sting burned my cheek, but I didn't cry this time. I just stood there staring at her, breathing heavily. She turned away from me, shaking her head. "I will not let you ruin his ordination. Do you know how much work has gone into this? Do you know how many lives he has touched?" I let out a trembling breath. "He touched me too, Mother." She shut her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply before turning to my father. "We should start packing her things." That was it. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a burden, a disgrace. They wanted me gone. I turned and walked out of the room, my vision blurred with unshed tears. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window staring at the dark sky, listening to the distant sound of crickets. My chest felt hollow, my body numb. They were sending me away. They had chosen him over me. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly. Number, they could send me away. They could call me a liar. But I wouldn't forget. And I wouldn't forgive. I stood outside the parish house, my hands clenched into fists, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled softly, signaling the evening prayer. I had thought about this moment all night. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it. But now, standing here facing the heavy wooden door that separated me from the man who had destroyed my life, all my words seemed to evaporate. Still, I couldn't leave without seeing him, without facing him. I knocked. A moment passed, then another. I had just begun to wonder if he would ignore me when the door creaked open. And there he was, Father Donald, dressed in his crisp white cassock, looking as composed as ever, like a man at peace with himself. His eyes swept over me, and for a brief second, something flickered in them. Surprise, maybe? Annoyance? Then it was gone. "Judith," he said, his voice smooth, unshaken. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "We need to talk." He glanced around, then stepped aside, allowing me in. The room smelled of old books and candle wax. The large crucifix on the wall seemed to loom over me, its shadow stretching across the floor. My stomach twisted at the irony of it all. Father Donald shut the door behind me. "Well," he said, folding his hands in front of him, "what is so important that you would sneak in here at this hour?" I took a deep breath, my fists trembling at my sides. "You ruined my life." He tilted his head slightly as if considering my words, then sighed. "Judith, I'm disappointed in you." I flinched, caught off guard. "Disappointed?" "Yes," he said, stepping toward me. "I truly thought you were smarter than this. More reasonable." I felt my body go rigid. "You forced yourself on me." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No one will believe that." I took a shaky step back. "I told my parents." His expression didn't change. "And?" My breath hitched. "And they called me a liar," I whispered. He nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. "Of course they did." I shook my head, anger rising in my chest like a fire about to consume me. I told the parish priest. Now a flicker of something, annoyance maybe, crossed his face. "That was a foolish move, Judith." "Was it?" I snapped. "He's investigating you." Father Donald chuckled, a low, almost amused sound. "Is he?" He walked past me toward his desk, his fingers brushing over a stack of neatly arranged papers. "And what do you think will happen when he does?" "Do you think the church will turn against me? That the people will? That the police will storm in here and drag me away in chains?" I said nothing, my breath shallow, my body tense. He turned back to me, his voice gentle now, almost pitying. "The church will protect me. The people will stand by me. You'll be nothing but a desperate, bitter girl who tried to ruin a man of God's life." I felt sick. I had known deep down that this would be his reaction, but hearing it, seeing his absolute confidence made my stomach churn. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You need to accept this, Judith. You need to move on." My jaw clenched. "I'm pregnant." For the first time, something in his expression shifted. His eyes flickered to my stomach, then back to my face. "So?" I swallowed hard. "You're the father." He smiled again, slow and infuriating. "No one will believe that either." I let out a shaky breath. "I'll take a DNA test." He chuckled again. "And who will allow it? The police? The same police who kneel before me every Sunday for blessings?" Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You should get rid of it," he said suddenly, his voice sharp and dismissive. "Have the procedure and forget this ever happened." I recoiled. "What?" He sighed as if I was the one being unreasonable. "You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why tie yourself to a scandal that won't even work in your favor?" I stared at him, disgust curling in my stomach. You really think you'll get away with this, don't you? His smile returned, calm and composed. I know I will. Silence stretched between us. My hands trembled, my nails digging into my palms. I had come here hoping for what? An apology? A confession? Even the slightest crack in his armor? But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't guilty. He wasn't sorry. And that terrified me more than anything. I took a step back toward the door, my whole body shaking with rage. You will regret this, I said, my voice trembling but firm. Father Donald didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply smiled. We'll see about that. I turned, yanked the door open and stormed out into the night, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I had never hated anyone the way I hated him in that moment, and I knew without a doubt that this wasn't over. The morning I was supposed to leave for the village, I woke up feeling hollow. I lay on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of my mother in the kitchen. She was probably preparing Father Donald's meal just like she did every morning. The thought made my stomach twist. They were sending me away like I was the shameful one, like I was the one who needed to be hidden. Not him. Not the man who had done this to me. I turned my head to the side, my packed bag sitting by the door like a reminder that I no longer belonged here. I closed my eyes and swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. Would I ever belong anywhere again? A knock on the door made me jump. Judith, get up, my mother's voice called. You're leaving in an hour. I didn't answer. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of hearing how broken I sounded. Instead, I forced myself up, my body feeling heavier than it ever had before. My legs ached as I moved to the corner of the room, reaching for my bag. That was when I heard it. A beep, loud, sharp, from the sitting room. Then silence. Then, my father's voice, low and unreadable. What is this? I froze. I couldn't make out my mother's response, but I heard the hurried shuffle of feet. Something was happening. I slowly crept toward the door, pressing my ear against the wooden frame. Another beep. My father was rereading something. Then, his voice again, but this time there was something strange in it, something tight. We have to go. Now. What? My mother's voice was sharper. Go where? The church, my father said. The parish council has summoned us. They want to see us immediately. My stomach flipped. The parish council? Why? My mother sucked in a breath. Who told them? Does it matter? My father snapped. They are calling for us. They want us to bring Judith. I barely had time to step back before my door flew open. My mother stood there, her face pale, her eyes sharp with panic. Get dressed, she ordered. I looked between her and my father, my pulse racing. What's happening? My father's jaw clenched. You should know. You caused this. Caused this? They were angry, terrified, because this was what they had been avoiding all along. They never wanted this to go beyond our four walls. They wanted to bury it, silence me. But now, it had reached the parish council. I should have been afraid too, but deep inside me, something small, something fragile, began to flicker. Hope. This was it. This was the moment they could no longer ignore. I felt my heart pound as I whispered, Are they going to listen to me? My father scoffed. They are going to listen to the truth. I clenched my fists. I am telling the truth. His nostrils flared, but before he could say anything, my mother grabbed my arm. Enough. Go and get ready. We have no choice but to go. She let me go, turning back to my father. What if they believe her? The way she said it, like the idea was impossible, absurd. My father's face darkened. They won't. I swallowed hard. They still didn't believe me. Even now, when the church itself was getting involved, they were still more concerned about protecting Father Donald than their own daughter. The tiny flicker of hope inside me dimmed, but I held on to it anyway. Because whether they believed me or not, I was going to speak. I turned away, shutting the door before they could say anything else. I reached for my dress. the plainest one I owned, because I didn't want to give them any reason to say I looked indecent or shameful. I brushed my hair back, my hands shaking slightly. I was still afraid. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something else too. A chance. A chance to be heard. A chance for justice. And I was going to take it. The parish council hall was packed. I felt the weight of every gaze on me as I stepped inside, my parents flanking me like guards escorting a criminal. The room smelled of polished wood and old books, the scent of burning incense still lingering in the air. The heavy wooden crucifix on the far wall seemed to loom over me, watching, judging. I swallowed hard, my palms damp. Rows of council members sat before me, their expressions unreadable, some stiff with skepticism, others tight with something that almost looked like concern. Father Matthew, the parish priest, sat at the centre, his hands folded on the table in front of him. He was the one who had promised to look into my story. I searched his face for reassurance, for anything that told me I wasn't walking into a trap. But his face remained unreadable. My father's grip on my wrist tightened for a second before he let go. A warning, a reminder. I knew what he wanted, what they both wanted. Don't embarrass us. Don't ruin a man of God. Don't make us the family that destroyed Father Donald's ordination. But I was past that. This wasn't about them anymore. Judith, Father Matthew's voice was steady but firm. Step forward. I did. My knees trembling, my throat tight. Tell us everything, he said. From the beginning, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what to say. I had replayed it in my head so many times that it was burned into my memory, but because I knew that once I spoke, I could never take it back. I glanced at my mother. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes cold. My father wouldn't even look at me. They were waiting for me to fail. Waiting for me to break. I took a shaky breath and turned back to the council, and then I spoke. I told them everything. How it started with the little things. Father Donald asking me to clean his room after mass server practice, the way his eyes lingered too long, the way his hands brushed against me when they didn't need to. How that one night when I was with Favor, he offered us drinks, how we switched by accident, and she was the one who drank whatever he had put in mine. How he sent me on an errand, and when I came back, I found Favor unconscious, her breathing slow, her body limp. How I panicked, shook her, tried to wake her up, but he told me not to worry, that she just needed to rest. How I had ignored the warning bells in my head, because why would a priest, a soon-to-be priest, do something so evil? And then, how it finally happened. How he used his authority, his power, to lure me into his room again, sending away the only other person with me. How he locked the door. How he pounced. How he stole something from me that I could never get back. My voice shook as I spoke, but I didn't stop. I told them about the fear, the shame, the pain that followed. The loneliness when my own mother slapped me, when my father called me possessed. I told them about how no one believed me, how even now, as I stood here, I could feel the doubt radiating from the very people who were supposed to serve justice. I finished speaking, my throat raw, my chest rising and falling as I struggled to catch my breath. The silence that followed was suffocating. I scanned the room. Some faces were blank, others skeptical. One woman at the far end had her hands clasped in front of her lips, her eyes glistening, but no one spoke. Then, a voice. Father Donald? It was Father Matthew. Step forward. I turned. The room shifted. The energy changed. And there he was. Father Donald. His white cassock was pristine, his hands folded in front of him like a devoted servant of God. Tears glistened in his eyes and he exhaled shakily, his entire body trembling. I clenched my fists. He was going to lie. I could feel it. And yet, as he opened his mouth, as his voice cracked with emotion, I knew the room would believe him before they ever believed me, because he wasn't just any man. He was a man of God. The room was silent as Father Donald stepped forward. His head was bowed, his hands clasped in front of him like a man about to pray. Tears glistened in his eyes, reflecting the dim light of the parish hall. His shoulders trembled as he inhaled shakily, his entire frame exuding sorrow, suffering. And I just knew that this was the moment he would turn everything against me. The moment he would twist the truth into something so unrecognizable that even I would question whether I had imagined it all. He sniffled, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his white cassock. "My beloved brothers and sisters in Christ," he began, his voice breaking, and that was all it took. Already heads were nodding in sympathy. I could hear soft sighs of pity, the kind people give when they see someone suffering unjustly. I wanted to scream, but I stayed still. I waited. He exhaled deeply and looked up at the council, at the parish priest, at my parents. Finally, his gaze settled on me. And then he spoke. "This is the cross I must bear," he said, shaking his head. "Just like our Lord Jesus Christ, who was falsely accused and sentenced to death, I too find myself a victim of wickedness." Murmurs rippled through the room. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. "You all know me," he continued. "I have dedicated my life to serving God, to serving this parish. I have prayed for your children, fasted for their salvation, counseled them when they lost their way. And yet here I stand, accused of something so vile, so unthinkable." His voice cracked on the last word. Someone gasped softly, as if the very idea of him committing such a sin was impossible. I felt sick. "Judith," he turned to me now, his expression pained, "I have tried to guide you. You know that. I have counseled you more than once, warned you about the dangers of the path you were walking." I frowned. What was he talking about? He turned back to the council. "I have seen her time and time again with Frank." The moment he said that name, I felt my stomach drop. Frank? My friend? Where was he going with this? "I have caught them together," Father Donald continued, his voice firm now, strong. "At the basement, behind the church, hidden in corners where they thought no one would see them. I have scolded her. I have warned her that she was losing herself to temptation, that she was walking a dangerous road." I could hear whispers now. I shook my head. "That's not true," I whispered, but my voice was drowned by the noise. Father Donald sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead as if recalling something painful. "When I threatened to tell her parents, she begged me not to," he said. "She told me I had no right to interfere in her private affairs, that she was old enough to make her own choices." I took a step forward. "That is a lie," I said, louder this time. But no one was listening to me. They were looking at him. He was playing his role so well, weaving a story so convincing, so perfect. "She told me," he continued, "that if I ever tried to expose her, she would make me regret it." I felt like the ground beneath me was splitting open. "I didn't think much of it then," he sighed. "I thought she would come to her senses. I thought, with prayer, she would find her way back." He turned his gaze on me again, and this time I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Satisfaction. He knew what he was doing. And he was enjoying it. "But now," he whispered, shaking his head, "I see that I underestimated how far she would go." A few people gasped. "She is with child," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and instead of owning up to her actions, instead of seeking forgiveness and redemption, she has chosen to ruin me instead." I couldn't breathe. "She knows what this means for me," he continued. "She knows that my ordination is days away, that the church has invested in me, that the people of this parish look up to me. She knew that a simple accusation could destroy me, and yet..." He inhaled deeply, his lips trembling. "And yet, she did it anyway. This couldn't be happening. She wanted to ruin my priesthood," he whispered, as if the very thought shattered him. "Because I tried to correct her." I stared at him, unable to move, unable to speak. I wasn't looking at a man of God. I was looking at a monster. And the worst part, they believed him. I had never felt more alone in my life. I sat there, frozen, as the murmurs in the hall grew louder, feeding off Father Donald's lies like flames devouring dry wood. But the worst was yet to come. "Call Frank," someone said, and that was when the last bit of hope I had clung to turned to dust. Frank, my childhood friend, my closest companion, the one person I had believed would never turn against me. I turned my head slowly, my heartbeat thudding in my ears as he stepped forward. His face was unreadable. His hands were clasped in front of him, much like Father Donald's had been moments ago. But there was no hesitation in his steps, no reluctance in his posture. He wasn't afraid. I swallowed hard. He was about to lie. I could feel it before he even opened his mouth. "Frank," the parish priest called out, "you've heard everything. You know why you're here." "Yes, Father," he said, his voice steady. I wanted to scream at him, "Don't do this." But I couldn't move. The air felt too thick, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder. The priest nodded at him. "Speak." Frank sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as if this was difficult for him. I didn't want it to come to this," he began, his voice laced with false guilt. I clenched my fists. "But I can't stay silent," he continued. "The truth needs to be told." I knew what was coming. I still wasn't prepared. Judith and I... He hesitated, then let out another sigh, shaking his head like someone burdened by a heavy secret. "We were in a relationship." The words sliced through me like a blade. A murmur swept through the crowd. I jerked forward, my breath catching in my throat. "That's not true." Frank barely spared me a glance. "We've been together for a while," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "But we kept it a secret. We didn't want anyone to know." I shook my head furiously. "Frank, what are you doing?" But he wouldn't look at me. "I made a mistake," he said. "I let things get out of hand. I should have been more careful." Gasps, shuffling feet, a few people whispering. I felt like I was suffocating. "The truth is," he swallowed hard, then forced out the words that would destroy me. "Judith got pregnant, and she didn't know what to do. She panicked." The whispers grew louder. "She told me she couldn't face her parents," he continued, his voice steady, smooth, rehearsed. "She was scared. She thought they'd throw her out, that they'd never forgive her. And then she had an idea." I was shaking now. "She said she'd blame someone else." I gasped. Frank turned toward Father Donald, his expression one of guilt and regret. "I never thought she'd go this far," he said, "but she was desperate." My world tilted. My father let out a deep, shuddering breath. I turned to look at him, and the pain I saw in his eyes was unbearable. He believed him. My own father believed him. I felt something inside me snap. I surged to my feet. "You're lying!" I screamed. "We were just friends. We've always been just friends." Frank didn't flinch. He wouldn't even look at me. "Why are you doing this?" I choked out. "Why are you lying?" Still nothing. I turned to the council, to the faces watching me with a mixture of pity and judgment. "He's lying," I pleaded. "Please, you all know me. I've never..." "Enough!" The parish priest's voice cut through my desperate cries like a blade. I turned to him, my chest heaving. He was staring at me with unreadable eyes. My mother was sobbing softly, her head bowed in shame. My father sat rigid, his hands clenched into fists, his face buried in his palms. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to claw my way out of this nightmare. But it was real, and they believed him. A slow, suffocating realization settled over me like a death shroud. I had lost. I didn't think my heart could break any more than it already had. I was wrong. The moment they called Favor's name, my blood turned to ice. She wasn't supposed to be here. I hadn't seen her since the day I begged her to stand by me. Since the day she turned her back on me and told me to get rid of it. I had thought that was the worst she could do. But as she stepped forward, her chin held high, her expression unreadable, I felt my body go numb. She wasn't here to help me. She was here to finish me. "Favor," the parish priest said, his voice grave. You were present that day. You drank the juice Father Donald gave. Tell us what you know." I swallowed, my lips trembling. Favor glanced at me for a split second. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't regret. It was the look of someone who had already made up their mind. Then she spoke. "I need to confess." Her voice was steady, calm. "I have been keeping this to myself for too long, but I can't anymore." I gripped the edge of my chair, my nails digging into the wood. "I was there when it all started," she continued, her voice thick with something I couldn't name. Judith. Judith told me she wanted to ruin Father Donald's life. My breath hitched. The room fell deathly silent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. "She said she was tired of how he was always correcting her," Favor went on, her voice stronger now, more confident. "She said he was interfering too much in her life. She wanted to punish him." I shook my head, my vision blurring. No. She told me the plan," Favor continued, her hands clasped together like she was praying for mercy. "She said we'd go to the parish house, that if Father Donald offered us anything, I should drink it, that I should pretend to be asleep." I clutched my chest. I felt like I was going to vomit. "She told me that when she left the room I should spread my legs a little," she said, her voice growing softer, like she was ashamed to even say the words. "So that when she came back, she could make it look like something had happened." I gasped. The room erupted in whispers. I turned to my father. He was staring at the floor. My mother was shaking her head, tears slipping down her face. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. "She wanted to set him up," Favor whispered. "She wanted everyone to think he was a monster. But he never touched me." A sharp, strangled sound escaped my throat. I didn't recognize my own voice. I didn't recognize my own life. "She planned all of this," Favor said, "and I can't be part of it anymore." She finally looked at me then, but it wasn't the look of a friend. It was the look of someone who had just delivered the final blow. I stood up, my legs shaking so badly I thought I'd fall. "Favor," I croaked. "Why are you doing this?" She said nothing. I turned to the parish priest, to the council, to anyone who would listen. "She's lying," I cried. "You all know me. You know I would never—" Enough. The parish priest's voice rang out like a judge delivering a verdict. I flinched. I looked at my father again, silently begging him to stand up, to fight for me. He didn't. He kept his head down. I turned to my mother. She was already wiping her tears as if she had accepted it, as if she had accepted that I was guilty. I staggered backward, my chest tightening. They believed her. They all believed her. My legs gave out beneath me and I crumpled to the floor. I wasn't crying, I wasn't screaming. I just sat there staring at nothing as the world around me collapsed. Favor had won. Father Donald had won. And I had lost everything. The room buzzed with hushed voices. The parish council huddled together, whispering among themselves, casting occasional glances in my direction. But I already knew. I didn't need to hear their verdict. I had already lost. My body felt hollow, like a house abandoned after a storm. My ears rang, drowning out the murmurs, the shifting feet, the rustling of robes. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor, not because I was ashamed. No, that wasn't it. I just couldn't bear to look up and see the triumph in Father Donald's eyes, or worse, the disappointment in my father's. The parish priest finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We have reached a decision." A cold wave of silence washed over the hall. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. He turned to Father Donald first. "We commend you," he said solemnly, "for your patience, your dignity, and your unwavering faith in the midst of this terrible accusation." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I squeezed my hands into fists. "You have carried this cross with the grace of a true servant of God," the priest continued, "and for that, we honor you." A few people nodded. Some even clapped softly. I wanted to scream. to stand up and shout at them, shake them, make them see the truth. But my voice was gone. Then the priest turned to me. "And as for you, Judith," I braced myself, "you have brought shame upon this church." Each word struck like a lash against my skin. "You have attempted to destroy a man of God, a man who has dedicated his life to this community. No. Your lies have not only wounded Father Donald, but have disgraced your family." A sharp intake of breath came from beside me. I turned, hope sparking for a fraction of a second. My father was standing. His face was carved from stone, his lips pressed into a firm, unforgiving line. For a moment, I thought, "Please, Papa, please." But then he spoke. "My daughter is no longer my daughter." The room spun. A gasp rippled through the crowd, but no one spoke against him. His words were final, unshakable. He turned away from me, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable, like I was already dead to him, like I had never been his child at all. A numbness settled into my bones. I wanted to cry, to break down, to scream at him, why? But I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. The parish priest sighed. "It is decided. Judith, you are to leave this town. Immediately." No one objected. No one fought for me. I looked at my mother one last time. She was crying, but she didn't move. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out. The journey away from everything I had ever known felt unreal, like I was floating outside my own body, watching a version of myself being discarded like garbage. No one spoke to me as I was packed into the worn-out old bus that would take me to my grandmother's village. My father didn't come to see me off. My mother, oh, my mother, stood at a distance, wringing her hands, her eyes red but dry. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't hug me. She didn't fight for me. The bus door slammed shut, and with it something inside me shattered. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass window, my breath fogging up the surface. Outside, the town I had grown up in blurred past me. The market stalls where I had walked with Mama to buy vegetables, the small school building where I had dreamed of becoming something greater, the towering walls of the church where I had once felt safe. Safe. What a cruel word. I let out a slow, shaky breath and rested a hand over my stomach. "You're still here," I thought. "They abandoned me, but I still have you." Tears threatened to spill, but I clenched my jaw and forced them down. I would not cry anymore. I had cried enough. The bus rumbled on, carrying me farther and farther away from my old life, from my innocence, from the girl I had been before Father Donald stole everything from me. The moment I stepped off at the village station, the weight of my disgrace settled onto my shoulders. I was alone. No one to run to. No friends, no family who believed me. I walked slowly toward my grandmother's house, my feet dragging like I was wading through mud. She was waiting at the door, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her lips pressed together. She didn't look surprised to see me. I had a feeling she had been told everything already. She led me inside, her silence sharp as a blade. "You will work in this house," she said simply. "You will not bring shame to me the way you brought shame to your parents." I swallowed hard and nodded. No argument, no defense, there was no point. That night, lying on a thin mattress in the tiny room she had given me, I stared at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of what had happened. The injustice of it all burned inside me, a slow, simmering rage. They had cast me away to protect a predator. They had thrown me to the wolves to save a man wrapped in the skin of a saint. But one day, the truth would come out. One day, they would all see him for what he truly was. And on that day, I would not be the one drowning in shame. I would be the one watching as they burned. I spent my days cleaning, washing, cooking, chores that never seemed to end. My grandmother made sure I worked hard, as if trying to punish me into repentance. But at night, when the house was quiet, I sat by the small wooden table in my room and wrote. I wrote everything, every moment, every detail, every touch, every word Father Donald had spoken to me the night he stole my dignity. I wrote about Favor, about the drink we had switched, about how she had seen the truth with her own eyes but still chose to betray me. I wrote about Frank, about the look in his eyes when he lied, when he handed me over to the wolves just to protect a monster. I wrote about my mother's silence, my father's rage, the slap, the names they called me. I filled pages with my pain, my anger, my truth. No one believed me, but the words on the paper did. And I promised myself, one day someone else would too. Some nights I would sit in bed, my hands resting on my growing stomach, feeling the tiny life inside me move. You and I whispered, we're alone in this. A soft kick against my palm, like a tiny heartbeat reaching out to me. I smiled through the tears. I will tell you the truth when you are old enough to understand, I whispered to the baby growing inside me. I will never lie to you like they lied to me. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew one thing for certain. One day, the world would know what Father Donald had done. One day, they would see him for what he truly was. And on that day, they would all regret turning their backs on me. To be continued. Stay tuned for part 3 as the story unfolds. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. Your support means a lot.